got the recording. So before I put up the slides, right, I just wanted to give a brief introduction about myself and hear from all of you as well. Uh, in terms of about yourself, what are your expectations and what you're currently doing, which will allow me also to understand and accordingly tailor the way I'm taking the sessions. So as an introduction, my name is Taha Hussain. Uh, I am a chartered accountant and a certified information systems auditor with over 20 years of experience in information security audit, IT audits. I cleared my CISA in 2007. And from then on, I was associated with Deloitte India for almost 25 years. And most of my IT audits and all, it's something that I did for a lot of big companies in India and outside India as well. So I have worked on SOX, I have worked on SOC, I have worked on IT audits, uh, and basically, I have also worked on internal audits, process audits, and any other audits which have IT uh, as such. So that's about me. One fun fact about me is that I love gadgets and I love reading uh, novels. And yep, that's about me. So if I can, have a brief introduction about you all, then we can start quickly. Whoever wants to go first.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah, this is Vaibhav here. I work for a bank and I carry around say 15 years of experience into IT infrastructure domain. In my current profile, I am responsible for the IT GRC part, and uh, there's a mandate to undergo this certification. So I'm looking out for training, come educate knowledge of this CISA curriculum. So that is what my expectation from this time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Vaibhav. Who wants to go next?
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Mpho. I am from South Africa. I currently work within the banking space. Also have a little bit of experience at EY, and within my portfolio right now, I do IT audits and a little bit of data analytics as well. And what I'm looking forward to, honestly, just getting the certification.
No, no, absolutely. That's to be honest, CISA is one of the uh, I would say top certifications globally when it comes, especially when it comes to IS audit, as well as from a certification standpoint as well. Especially with the focus today being on cyber, on AI. Uh, so everybody, all of the new services do need an auditor to actually come in and ensure that everything is happening as it should. So yeah, it's a good. Thank you so much.
So, hi Taha and all my colleagues here. This is Mrityunjay. I'm from Pune, and I bring my experience of more than 18 years into risk management and fraud monitoring. Currently, I'm with Bajaj Alliance as an enterprise risk management team. And before that, I have served for SBI Group for more than 15 years in a row. And currently, I'm taking care of enterprise level risk, including everything like credit risk, market risk, cyber risk, and anything. So, to add the knowledge with respect to IT auditing and SOX related reporting and the GRC compliance related reporting, I want to excel my knowledge. So, I have joined this session with you, Taha. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Hi Taha.
Hello everyone. Sorry.
Hello, hello everyone. My name is Saurabh and I'm from New Delhi. And about my qualification, I have done post-graduation in risk management, and currently I'm working at RSM under the IT risk advisory. And it's been 3 to 4 months, so I'm new to this profession. So I realized that CISA is one of the top tier certification which is in demand in order to gain experience or to grow yourself within the IT domain. So that is why I have decided to get enrolled into this program and want to gain more and more knowledge regarding this. That's all. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Saurav. Yeah, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Divya. I'm from Canada. So actually, I work as an IT auditor at Video Canada, and I have 1 year of experience in the IT audit. So my expectation, so that's why I wanted to have a CISA that will help me to broaden my knowledge, and yeah, so it's very helpful for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Yes.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Alvin. I'm from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. My background is actually from accounting degree. Currently, I'm with PwC, doing ITGC and NITEC audit. It has been always been my dream to get CISA certification. So I'm very happy and I wish to learn from you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alvin. Okay, who's left?
I can go next.
Yep, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Simran Banushali and I am from Mumbai and I come over a little over 5 years of experience in cybersecurity. And my expectation from this certification is that I can become a full-time auditor. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, Simran. Okay, we do have a couple of people more.
I can go next. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so myself, Vaibhav Pawar. I am also from Mumbai and I'm currently working in cybersecurity domain for around 4 years. And currently, for the career growth and to get knowledge in audit domain, I'm joining this course, and I want to prepare for the CISA certificate.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vaibhav.
Hi, Taha and everyone. My
Hello,
name
everyone.
is Sumit. I am from Punjab, India. I am an IT audit consultant with one of the big fours, having experience of around 4 years, working in the area of SOX and ICOFAR audits, predominantly in ITGCs and ITACs. Want to pursue CISA certification to further gain more understanding in IS audits and risk management and governance part. I'm looking forward to gain practical insights from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sharyar. I'm based in the US. I'm currently working in the insurance sector, focusing on internal audit. And my past experience contains working in the Big Four, starting with tax and then moving on to external audit. I'm joining this course to broaden my knowledge, but also to increase my career growth in my position. And hopefully, I believe CISA is going to be one of the biggest certifications going forward, especially now that technology is adapting very rapidly, especially with AI. And I'm sure governance, risk, and compliance will be the main topics going forward. So here I am.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess.
Good day, Mr. Tah and everyone.
Yes, please.
Yes, this is Kabelo Kopa from Lesotho, Maseru. I have over 10 years experience in the mining industry, actually. But, well, for your record specifically, I'm a fresher in the auditing, especially the information systems. So I'm a beginner. So then, but however, I I'm a qualified internal auditor. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Is anyone else left? Covered most of everyone.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shraddha Dogra. I hail from Bangalore, India. Currently working as an IA SOX auditor in one of the reputed manufacturing company. In total, I have a of 8+ years. Reason I have opted for CISA certification is because I want to widen up my horizons from just doing business internal audits to ITGC audits as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Shraddha, your name is appearing different.
Yeah, actually, I'm using my husband's Gmail account. I believe that's why.
Okay, not an issue. Thank you. Yeah, I guess that does cover everyone. So I hope I'm not missing someone. Okay, I will take the silence as a yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And I guess one of the major factors and drivers for doing CISA is, of course, career growth. Also, in terms of getting a foothold in IT audit, and also knowing about audit, knowing I guess I would say basically entering into IT audit, already experienced with internal audit or other areas, and now basically wanting to get into IT audit. So absolutely, CISA as a course from ISACA itself, right? Okay, now I can give the presentation as well. Just give me one sec. Okay, hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so there's one request. I will be minimizing. So in case you're raising your hand, I may not be able to know. So I would request in case anyone has any questions. So I like to have it interactive. So as and when we're going through these slides, in case you have any questions or any thoughts, just unmute yourself and you can ask. And I will also keep on asking definitely certain questions in between. Sorry, we're going to have a mock. We'll do some Q&As also in between. As and when an hour is completed, we'll do some Q&As. We will take a short break of around 10 minutes, around the 1.5 hour mark, and we'll take a break for 10 minutes and then continue. So that's going to be the structure. So thanks a lot. Let me now just start completely. Okay. Okay. So basically, the entire, again, just to give a brief, all of you are aware that, ISACA basically came up with the Certified Information Systems Auditor certification. I guess it's been almost there since the last 3 decades or so. And this certification has been in place from a perspective of, see, from an audit standpoint, we have, globally, if you look at it, there are a lot of bodies which primarily look at auditing, right? In the US, you have the AICPA, which basically deals with certified public accountants. In India, we have something called as the ICAI, which is the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and various other countries have their own regulations and regulatory bodies, which basically look at the profession of auditing. Now, one of the main factors is up to the year 2000, I would say, right? IT was considered more of a service, right? In fact, IT was not even called IT. It used to be called MIS, abroad as well as in India as well. And from the at that time, auditing from an IT standpoint was not considered that critical, in the sense, because mainly the reliance was on manual documentation, manual record maintenance. It used to be primarily, focused on manual records, focused on manual processes and controls. And IT used to be done maybe where, let's say, the audit committee or somebody were to ask a little difficult question, or the auditor felt that something was wrong. It was more of an optional thing. However, at that time itself, ISACA knew the importance of how IT is going to be important. They had come up with certification specifically for IT audit, because there was nothing else which was covering IT audit as such. right? And they also work with industry bodies to come up with frameworks around IT, like COVID. And basis that, IT auditing actually started to come into focus, I would say, from SOX, when the Sarbanes-Oxley was actually, I would say, not just introduced, but when it came in force. So I'll discuss that in detail a little more going in the slides going forward. But the whole, I would say, the crux was that although there was a lot of focus everywhere on manual auditing, IT audit or IS audit was something which was not, having its own agency, you would say. So hence, ISACA was basically formed to, I would say, again, ISACA is also a not-for-profit, how do I say, collaboration of industry, various industry bodies. It's a collaboration of various companies which have come up to basically, it's an independent organization, of course, but it's basically a collaboration of various industries to govern the profession of information security, right? And that includes, of course, their initial certification was CISA, which was the most popular. Then subsequently, looking at the importance of IT, they started with different certifications like Certified Information System Manager, then CGEIT. Now today, of course, they have come up with certifications around AI as well. And the objective here was to basically give the confidence to the auditors and the auditees that the person who's actually doing the IT audit does hold a specific and specialized certification when it comes to IT audit. And that still holds good today as well, looking at the amount of recognition which is there in the market in terms of CISA. Right now, how does basically the CISA exam or the CISA work? So CISA is a certification, CISA is a certification which a person needs to. It's basically not just a simple exam, a certification exam where you just say, okay, I have written my CISA and I am a CISA. It doesn't work like that. It's basically writing an exam and also proving to ISACA that you have some amount of practical experience before you are actually allowed to be called a CISA, basically a Certified Information Systems Auditor, or you get your certification, right? So it's a two-step process. Of course, the difficult part is the exam. The practical experience part is basically anything where you are involved in any of the areas governing IT audit, right? Now, most of you on the call are directly or indirectly looking or dealing with IT audits. So, hence from an experience perspective, that's pretty straightforward. But coming to the exam part, right? The format has always been multiple choice questions. And basically, earlier, of course, it was 6 domains. Now it has come down to 5 domains, and 5 domains have a specific weightage. So how we have broken up the course also is that it's going to be domain wise. We're basically going to take up domain 1, domain 2, domain 3, domain 4, and domain 5 over the coming weeks, and try to take you through the content for each domain basis the areas which are specified by ISACA as per the CISA manual, as per the audit prep guide as well, and also in alignment with the content which is published by CISA as part of the CISA review manual. Again, we have taken some places explained. We will be explaining, or rather, going a little more in depth where needed. We will be, just skimming topics where it's not so needed. So, depending on how the topics we're going to discuss more in detail. Wherever you have any specific queries, we're going to basically discuss those as well. So that's going to be the structure of the training. And today we're basically starting with domain 1. That's around basically information systems audit. Sorry. Right? Introduction to information systems auditing. And the topics that we're going to cover today, or rather I would say topics in this domain. My objective is to basically across today and tomorrow cover domain 1. Right? It has a weightage of around 18%. So you can expect maybe around 27 odd questions to come from this domain. There's as per ISACA itself that around 27 questions would be coming in from this domain in the final examination. So we're going to basically be touching this domain, and this is the domain which primarily deals with uh, the entire audit process, right? How an audit happens, basically key objectives of auditing, importance of auditing, how did it come into being in the first place, right? What are the responsibilities, what are the type of audits, what are the stages? So all those topics we'll be basically covering as part of the IT audit, as part of this domain rather. And if you see here, we basically start with objectives and we go into the history, then we look at the roles and responsibilities, the stages, right? Then using the work of experts, what is basically planning steps, risk-based auditing, that's something which is going to be important. And question does come around this topic, right? Audit types based on target statements of standard auditing standards. So there are definitely standards issued by standards and guidelines which have been issued by ISACA, and we will be touching upon those as well, right? Then we will be looking at the various type of certifications which are available in the market. We're looking at the code of ethics. Again, you don't have to, they don't ask questions specifically from, let's say, the standards of the code of ethics per se, but then, you may definitely get a question around this topic in terms of saying, how do you determine that an auditor is in line with the ethical requirements? So, I'm just giving a generalization, but around that topic, we may expect questions. We are also going to do a Q&A, mock Q&As as well for these topics. Basically, then looking at conducting an audit, right? Evidence, how do we treat evidence? What are the various type of evidences? What sampling we're going to look at? How does sampling work, right? Again, audit risk, which is one of the very important area. Then basically we look at automated, how do I say, ACTTs, or rather automated testing, or CAATs rather, computer assisted audit techniques. Then we're going to look at, as I said, one is sampling, report drafting. Then we're going to look at continuous auditing. Basically, what are the different types of auditing frameworks which are available, right? And the auditing types which are available. So we're going to look at all those as well. Okay, this is again the different type of areas which get audited, right? And we're going to discuss those in a little detail in terms of what they are, what is the purpose, and what an auditor should keep in mind when auditing these particular areas, right? At the end, again, we're going to look at summary of all whatever we have discussed. We'll be basically summarizing before we move on to the next domain. So this is basically going to be our contents across today and tomorrow, across 2 days. And I'll try my best to complete. In case there's a slight spillover, we'll take it up next week and then start domain 2. Okay, so basically, let's start with the introduction to IS auditing. So basically, what is an IS auditing? A formal examination of information systems. At the end of the day, audit always, especially when we are looking as a auditor, right? With a, how do I say, when you're auditing in a specific environment, then it always has to be a formal. And this form, the term formal is going to be very important because it does require an auditor to have an understanding with the auditing in terms of what is the purpose of the audit, what exactly is going to be the scope, and those topics basically are going to come later, right? So that's the reason it says formal examination of information systems to ensure compliance with laws, regulations, and governance criteria. Okay, so globally, again, the main reasons for getting audited is, of course, regulations, right? We have the SOX in the SOX in the US. In India, we have something called as IFC. Similarly, in UK, we have the UK SOX now, which is going to come in. And similarly, across the globe, each and every country has its own specific set of standards or regulations which require organizations to be audited. And that's one of the primary drivers for auditing per se, right? Trust me, if there were no regulation, nobody would get themselves audited, or rather, there would be very, very few organizations which would actually get themselves audited. Nobody likes their work to be checked by someone else. Okay, and that's human nature. So, of course, the main driving factor is laws and regulations. And of course, apart from that, right, as an organization, uh, the organizations also set up their own internal processes to basically ensure that before a surprise comes in, either in the form of an external auditor or a regulator coming in, have the own set of governance guidelines saying, okay, we will do a process audit or a specific internal audit or a specific audit which covers, let's say, information security, right? Again, let's say organization wants to go into AI, they have not yet gone, but they might say, I want to get an audit done of my AI system to basically ensure that, if I were to go live, it basically complies. Similar to any other process as well, right? Now, what is the importance of auditing? It basically verifies management's claims to stakeholders, including shareholders, boards, and clients. Uh, the whole objective here is because management is saying that, my systems are designed and operating effectively, right? In case of, let's say, a control, or if it is anything, right? It could be a cyber security audit, it could be the standard IT audit that we do. And the whole objective is to give an opinion, right? Where if management is basically saying that the financials are designed and the auditor is basically substantiating the same, then what is the auditor doing? They are also verifying, right, whatever claims are made by management, doing an independent verification, right, doing an independent evaluation, and basically giving. Now here, stakeholders are varied, right? It depends on the purpose of the audit. So if an audit is done, let's say, as part of uh, the financial statements, so there the stakeholders would be the shareholders, right, or the board of directors. Whereas, let's say, it's a management audit, the stakeholders would be more of the more board of directors. Or if it's a regulatory audit, a regulator has basically appointed someone to go in and have a look at the systems. There, the stakeholder would be the regulator. So basically, the main objective is to verify claims made by management to the stakeholders, right? And of course, report. Any audit cannot be done, or rather is not called complete without an audit report being issued. Now, when we say an audit report, it's basically more, we're going to discuss audit reports as well, but the objective of an audit report is to say that why was this audit done and what is the outcome of the audit, right? Either it could be a control assurance audit saying the controls are designed and operating effectively. It could be a third-party audit, again, which says the service organization's controls are designed and operating effectively. It could be maybe a review which just says, that we did not come across any issues, or we come across any issues and are given in the report. So basically, an audit on a report is required to substantiate whatever work has been done by the auditor. Again, regulatory frameworks is necessitated by regulations such as Sarbanes-Oxley SOX, and which was enacted in response to corporate scandals. Now, what are the key objectives? Of course, the primary one is compliance, right? Again, adherence to relevant laws, adherence to regulations, and finally adherence to standards as well. So relevant laws, again, we discussed, right? It's more in terms of, let's say, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US, which mandates the Sarbanes-Oxley Act mandates the financial statements to be, certified by the CEO and the CFO, and also by verified by the auditor. So basically, that's adherence to laws, adherence to regulations. Again, when you look at specific banking and regulation, banking and insurance, sorry, you have a lot of regulations which require organizations to provide or perform specific audits. There's a cybersecurity. It could be a cybersecurity, especially today in India, where we see that the Reserve Bank of India or the Securities and Exchange Board of India have specified organizations to conduct a cyber audit, a cybersecurity audit, and it has to be done by a CISA or equivalent, right? So those type of that also could be one of the objectives. And finally, adherence to standards is more like globally, right? Audits are done in line with certain standards. When you look at a financial audits are typically done in or as per certain standards. Similarly, for IS audit also, ISACA has come across with certain standards which need to be followed from an audit standpoint. And basically, any auditor who's giving a report, let's say for in alignment with ISACA, let's say as a CISA, right? It's giving an audit report. Then the understanding is that they have followed these relevant standards when they've done the audit. Next is, of course, risk management. Identify risks associated with information systems. That's the objective. And next is assess risks to mitigate potential threats. So here again, the whole focus is that audits need to be risk-based. Right? When we look at audits in detail, also, it's going to start out with risk. What are the risks, right, that an organization is subject to, and to meet those risks, what are the controls that the organization has actually put in place? And as auditors, basically, the auditor comes in, looks at whether the risks identified are sufficient, are appropriate, and also then are the risks associated with information systems appropriate, right? Of course, you always have common risks related to unauthorized changes, inappropriate access, unauthorized access. So apart from that, are all the risks which are relevant from an IT perspective covered, and whether sufficient controls have been identified. And of course, data integrity and security, where basically are assets safeguarded, and how is integrity of information maintained, and also availability of information to support organizational goals. In subsequent domains, right, domain 4, domain 5, we're actually going to deep dive a lot more into these topics as well, in terms of safeguarding of assets, integrity of data, encryption. So all those topics are also something that we're going to look at. Now the whole point is that as a CISA, right, as a information systems auditor, you are required to ensure that you are aware of exactly why are you doing an audit, what is the purpose of doing an audit, and what are the expectations of people, or rather, how do you basically, what do you need to do to ensure that you meet the expectations of how an audit is to be done. So that's the primary objective of this domain as far as CISA is concerned. The importance of auditing, right? One is, of course, verification of management claims. We'll discuss this in detail, right? It's basically confirm the accuracy of the claims or whatever statements have been made by management to stakeholders, right? Support for stakeholder trust, because basically an IS auditor, right? See, a lot of times when you look at financial audits, especially let's say SOX, an IS auditor basically is part of the team. They certify on IT systems, and of course the primary auditor, right, who's actually signing off on the financial statements, will this use the work of the IT auditor or the IS auditor to ensure that the controls overall are designed and operating effectively. So from that standpoint, right, this gives trust to stakeholders that okay, the IT systems are, the controls and the processes are working, and basically considering that the IT systems also are actually designed and operating effectively and are working as desired. Finally, of course, regulatory compliance also we have discussed. Again, it could be laws and regulations such as SOX. Any questions till now? Okay. So just a brief history, right? As I said, up till 2000, IT audit was not something which was mainstream. Of course, there were multiple reasons for it. The primary was that the globe was moving towards computerization, more towards digitization, and hence IT audit was not given so much importance. Secondly, there was no regulation around it, to be honest, right? It basically had a lot of organizations and auditors both had a lot of flexibility when it came to what should be covered as far as controls, as far as audit reports and all are concerned, audits and all are concerned. Because of a major scandal, right, happening with an organization called Enron. Enron was basically a power utility company. However, using certain creative accounting, right, they were able to offset their losses and show it outside the books, and basically to the shareholders, right, and the public at large, the position which was shown was that the company is really profitable, whereas in reality, it actually had nothing. It was hollow, right? And this was sort of uh, done by the management, and you can say that the auditors did not pay the required level of attention which was actually needed. Because of this, there was a huge amount of loss in the market, and the US SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, which basically uh, governs or manages or regulates, right, listed organizations in the US, in collaboration with the Congress, basically the government there, uh, I would say, gave their inputs, and then the government basically came up with an act called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was passed by the Congress and the Senate, and that act basically codified the responsibilities of management and auditors when it came to controls and when it came to audit. It basically laid down what is required, that organizations need to follow a framework for controls. The most common framework today globally which is followed today is COSO, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. It also laid down that the basically CEO and the CFO, right, need to certify the results, need to sign off on the results, and the auditor also has to sign off on the controls and the results, right? And because of this, the focus and the onus shifted a lot on management, saying that you are the ones who are primarily responsible for controls in the organization, and you cannot just say that people at the junior level are responsible for it. At the topmost level of the organization, especially the CEO, the CFO, have to take responsibility for all the controls in the organization. Now, what type of system they put in, that was something which organizations need to decide for themselves. But there were certain guidelines which said, which are there in the act, which basically specifies that organizations need to adopt a controls framework. That controls framework needs to basically look at the risks, the controls. The controls need to be tested, and it's tested by management, basis which the management certification or the CEO, CFO certification happens. And subsequently, the auditors also will come in, look at those controls, evaluate basically the design and operating effectiveness, and give their opinion. And from then on, basically the importance of testing of controls, right, became mainstream. And because of that particular aspect, processes which were basically required to be tested were dependent on IT systems, because by that time IT was beginning to develop. People were started moving the data to data centers, started outsourcing a lot of processes, and from an IT standpoint, we're using ERPs, right? Especially SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards. So those ERPs were a lot in use globally, and because of that, certain controls, because the data was coming in from the system, right? Because the data was generated by the system through reports being relied on. That was primary reason. Sorry, somebody raised their hand or something. Okay. So that was the primary reason that people started asking questions around IT as well, saying, okay, when let's say you are using an ERP, so how do we know that the data which is coming out of the ERP is reliable, right? Are appropriate IT general controls there in place? Are IT application controls in place, right? And because of that, the other main aspect also which came up at that time was outsourcing, because a lot of organizations are outsourcing either their data centers, their IT processes, IT, I would say, development, their IT maintenance was getting outsourced, certain business processes were getting outsourced. And they said even if the process is outsourced, the responsibility still remains with the user organization or the primary organization. Even if they outsource, they cannot escape responsibility saying it's being done by a third party, so I will not, I will not sign off. So that was not permitted. The CEO and the CFO and the organization are responsible, even if the controls are outsourced to a third party. And because of that, again, third-party standards like SSA 18, with the SAS 70 at that particular point of time came in, which again required testing at the service organization or the organizations that provide the service. That covered IT as well. In fact, subsequently, SOC 2 was introduced, which focuses primarily around IT. That is security, availability, confidentiality, processing, integrity, and privacy. So that's a brief history around how the importance of IT audit, how the importance of CISA actually started uh, expanding globally. And of course, once the US started, other countries also started coming out with their own regulations for each of their countries. Some of it was proactive, some of it was reactive in terms of certain scandals. So again, in India, there was a scandal in an organization called Satyam Computer Services, which actually involved manipulation of IT systems and the backend code, right? Organization used to do a lot of backend changes to hide certain illicit transactions. They used to generate reports with certain conditions in the report itself, which used to hide data from auditors and from others who wanted to look at that particular data. So because of that, that fraud was a major factor in India for the government of India to come up with regulations and the importance of IT being asked at boards and audit committees. Okay. Now, this is basically the background to why IT audit was. Now, coming to what are the roles and responsibilities of an IS auditor, right? Now, we have said, okay, fine, this is, this is basically why the IT auditors need to be done. Why, what all, what could be the reason for getting an IT audit done? Now, let's say organization has decided, or it basically has to get an IT audit done. So it comes to an IS auditor. So what is now the responsibilities and roles of an IS auditor? Of course, first is qualification. Maintain necessary knowledge, competency, and skills for effective auditing, right? And here it is very important because when you talk about knowledge, competency, and skills, right? As an auditor, you are required to have professional skepticism because you cannot just take anything at face value. Now, when you talk about professional skepticism, professional, the term itself means that you, the IS auditor has some amount of prior knowledge, prior experience, competency, and skill before being able to make a decision, right? So basis that, it says auditors have to maintain the relevant knowledge, the competency. Competency again comes through a certification like CISA. Skills comes from the work experience. Knowledge basically comes from multiple sources. It could be reading, it could be practice, a lot of other factors. Right? Then comes to planning and execution, right? Identify legal requirements for compliance and document. Because again, as I said, if you're an IT or IS auditor doing an audit, you need to document the purpose of that particular audit. What is the objective? What is the purpose that this audit is being done? Then review procedures related to regulations to create a compliance checklist where needed. So let's say you're looking at an organization which needs to comply with GDPR or needs to comply with HIPAA or ISO. Then in that case, an auditor is required to ensure that they have a checklist or at least a audit plan which meets the requirement of that particular regulation. And the audit team basically reviews the systems and processes, related risks and controls implemented to manage these risks, right? So the whole objective of audit is to review the existing process, right? It could be IT process in the sense, it could be an ITGC process like a change management or user access. It could be an IT application process, something like automated PO, purchase order processing, automated sale order processing, automated invoice processing. So those are IT application controls. So look at those particular areas, look at those particular controls, right? Understand the process, understand the system, understand the risk, and basically see that the controls are sufficient to manage or mitigate these particular risks. The next one is an advisory role. So apart from having the skills, doing the audit, right? Basically doing the planning and execution. The other role which an IS auditor is required to do is also being an advisor, right? Guide management on legal and regulatory issues concerning information systems. So it's not just about coming in, doing an audit, giving a report and going. It's also an auditor is also required to, or are expected to add some amount of value to an organization in terms of guiding them if, let's say, they're not doing something right, or providing inputs. Again, it doesn't mean that they basically do the remediation or the work. It is more in terms of guiding or advising. A lot of organizations, in fact, if you see from an IS auditor perspective also, let's say one example I gave was client is implementing a new system, right, a new application. And before going live, they want to understand whether all the aspects which are required to be covered are covered or not. So in that scenario, basically the auditor acts more as an advisor to the management, saying that, okay, this is the control, this is the control that you should have in place. They don't implement the controls, but basically they guide the management in saying, let's say you don't have your password policy, right, is 6 characters. However, it should be, let's say, 10 characters at a minimum, 12 characters for super users. So something like that. Right. Auditor assessor considering process review, change management. Basically, this is the processes that we spoke about. Right. Ethical considerations, yes. Our auditor is expected to follow the code of ethics, maintain independence. Very, very important. As I was saying, an auditor cannot do an implementation and do the audit of the same implementation. Cannot say that, tell the client that, okay, if you're going in for a new system, I will come in, I will look at all your controls, I will help you fix those controls as well. I will write the policies, procedures for you, and subsequently come back and say, okay, I will do the audit of those controls. That is a very, very clear conflict of interest. And basically, an auditor is required to be independent and ethical. Last one, of course, evaluation of policies. Assess an organization's policies, procedures, and controls to ensure alignment with legal and regulatory standards. Right. This is basically how the work is to be done. Right. Look at the organization systems, look at the organization's policies, the procedures, the configurations, and identify any gaps which might come in. Here, when we mean by gaps is basically areas where either risk is not mitigated or the controls are too weak to support the risk to the organization or to augment the risk to the organization. These are the various types of audits. Of course, the internal audit. Internal audit is something which is done internally at the organization level. It could be done by people who are part of the organization, or it could be even done by a third party, or a combination of both. And an internal audit is basically the first line in terms of before an external audit is done, or before any other audit is done, an internal audit is carried out to assess whether the organization systems are meeting the requirements of the organization in terms of efficiency, in terms of compliance with the law, with the regulations, the board of directors, the compliance with the policies and procedures laid down by the board of directors. So in those aspects, right, an internal audit is carried out by the organization itself. The difference here is the stakeholder for an internal audit will always be an internal person. It could be the CFO, it could be the CEO, it could be the CRO, the chief risk officer. So basically, the internal audit part is something which is done by the management itself. Now, external audit is which is done by a third party, right? Now, one example here which is given is licensing a product approval, but it is just an example, but it could be for a lot of other factors also. One factor is even for standard financial audits, where basically an external auditor comes in, gives their opinion on the system, and a part of it will basically, because the systems are computerized, a part of the audit will involve IT auditor also giving, how do I say, not signing off per se, but giving a confirmation to the primary audit team that the controls are designed and operating effectively. Okay, involves an audit team that inspects the audit and produces a report. Last is self-assessment. Again, the difference between internal audit and a self-assessment, a lot of times is like internal audit is still an independent function in the organization, right? It is where, let's say, if I want to do an internal audit for a specific process, the people who are going to do internal audit are not going to be part of that particular process. They are going to be person, as I said, right? A separate team which is internal, or external agency which is hired to support, right? So either of those scenarios, it's basically an internal audit. Whereas in a self-assessment, it is more like it is done by the process owners itself mostly, to ensure that everything is in place. Aims to identify areas for improvement before external audits. Any questions till now? Okay. Now, what are the various audit process stages? The first one, of course, is planning. Then comes the field work, and finally comes the reporting. Right. So planning is one of the most important processes for an auditor. The fact being that planning basically helps to ensure that the correct scope, right, the right set of people, the right set of controls, and the right set of circumstances are in place to basically for testing, right, or for performing the audit. So define the scope, objectives, and criteria, identify necessary resources, and develops a communication plan to ensure effective management. So the whole objective here is, in terms of planning, is basically to look at defining the scope, right? Defining the objectives, the criteria, and also ensuring that you have the right person for the right job. So typically, you cannot have a finance person looking with no IT experience looking at IT general controls, like a change management or a user access, because they will not be able to justify or do. Similar way, that's basically the planning stage, right? And yeah, one very important aspect is to have a communication plan. Whenever you are basically, as an auditor, you're going to do your planning. One of the aspects of planning is also to have a detailed communication plan in terms of how an audit is to be done. Now, once planning is complete,
Taha, one thing I want to ask,
sure.
that the business analysis framework,
Mm-hmm.
is the part of the planning stage as well.
Sorry, business
Analysis framework, where we gather, some basic information regarding the organization, whether they are in how many locations they have, what are there, is there any new product
yes,
line,
planning. Yes, very much part of planning, because planning involves identification of risks and determining the scope, right? So for determining the scope, you need to understand, right, what all is actually going to be included, what applications are relevant, what processes are relevant, what locations are going to be relevant. So all that aspect, right, will come under as part of planning. And when you look at the material also, when you look at the CISA manual as well, you will find planning is a very critical activity, because that's where your tone is set in terms of how the audit is going to be done, right? What you're going to ask, whom you're going to ask.
Risk assessment is also a part.
Yes, risk assessment is very much done at the planning stage, because risk assessment will allow you to determine whether how high the risk needs to be, right? It's a normal risk or a high risk, basis which the testing will actually be impacted. So if let's say a control or
accounts and all these things.
Sorry?
The significant accounts also, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you have significant accounts, right, you will basically significant accounts are basically from applications. So those applications also become critical because as a process, if you are identifying it as significant, then whatever applications will support that particular processes also become significant. And the way you look at right your approach to testing, the sample sizes and all also start changing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Then the next one is fieldwork. So once the planning stage is completed, right, you identified the risks, the controls, who's going to be basically, whom are we going to be working with, what is the plan, what is the audit plan, what is the audit schedule, then comes the fieldwork. So what does fieldwork involve? Conduct the audit by gathering data, right, evaluate controls and perform tests, and document findings and assess the effectiveness of process and controls. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead, sir. Saurav, you raise your hand.
No, I have asked the question.
Oh, okay, okay. Is someone else also raise their hand? No, okay. Right. So, the fieldwork part, right, is basically where the actual work starts in terms of gathering data, or rather, actual testing starts, which basically is in terms of gathering data, right, evaluating controls, performing tests around it. So, what type of test would you do? Would it be a sample-based test? Would it be a negative test? Would it be a positive test? Right? What are the sample size going to be? What is it just going to be an inquiry and inspection, or is it going to be re-performance observation and re-performance? So all the aspects come during fieldwork, right? And basically, once let's say the audit is completed, then the findings are documented. Okay, document findings assess the effectiveness of processes and controls. And the last, of course, once the planning and fieldwork is done, is the reporting part. Prepare the report, including findings, discuss the report with management, and of course, ensure follow-up action items for compliance. In case, let's say, there are any issues that are identified and still open, then that have to be tracked. Okay, just give me 1 minute. Yeah, I'm back. Also, to all of you, in case you want me to uh, go a little slow or go a little in detail, please do let me know, and I'll try to uh, adjust accordingly. So we've looked at the audit stages, right? Audit process stages. Now we come to the role of the audit committee. And why this is important? Because, okay, what's an audit committee, right? So most of you would have heard about the board of directors. So any organization, right, or rather any company which is listed, or rather not listed, I would say, but which is registered itself as a company, is required to have a board of directors. So if it's, let's say, a private company or an LLP or which is not listed, basically, right, will need to have a board of directors, but the requirement is a little less stringent. Whereas if an organization is listed on the stock exchanges, right, as if the company which is listed on the stock exchange, they will also need to have a board of directors, but there the board of directors will be governed by the requirements from the respective listing agency. So here in the US, it's the SEC. In India, it's the SEBI, which will basically say, or the act, right? The law itself, the Companies Act in India, or specific acts or regulation in the US or any other country for that matter, which will define how the board of directors should be composed of. So how many, what is the minimum size, what is the maximum size, what should be basically the composition, how many independent people, how many non-independent whole-time directors, how many independent directors. So that is basically the board which, and there is the whole objective of the board is basically to govern the company. So they will set the direction. Okay, they will define who is going to be the CEO, who is going to be the MD, right? How is the CFO going to be appointed? What are the roles and responsibilities? What is the direction the business will be taking? Okay, how the profit should be distributed, how control should be defined at an organization level. All that is basically carried out by the board of directors. Now, board of directors, because they're responsible for entire day-to-day, affairs of the company, or rather, basically the entire governance of the company, they also have subcommittees which do specific tasks, right? So one of the subcommittees is audit. Another one is remuneration, which basically is more responsible for remuneration. Like that, there are various committees, but one of the most critical ones is an audit committee. The reason being that the audit committee, although it's part of the board of directors, but it is responsible to ensure that at the organization level, right? Basically, the audit function or whatever audits include, could be external, could be internal, are actually done as per the requirements, right? It could be either independence requirements, legal requirements, regulatory requirements. All that basically is something the audit committee is responsible for. So primarily, the auditors will be appointed by the audit committee. It could be internal or external. The financial statements will be first vetted by the audit committee before actually going to the board and then being given to the going to the shareholders. So the audit committee plays a pivotal role when it comes to audit. And as I said, most of the company, all the companies which are listed need to have an audit committee. Apart from listed companies or other companies, it depends on the regulation. So smaller companies typically don't need to or have an audit committee, whereas larger organizations are required to have a audit committee, right? Uh, Now, what is the audit committee supposed to do? Right. One is, of course, the main part is governance, govern the audit which is happening, or lay down the directions, lay down guidelines on how audit is to be done, what is going to be the scope. So all that aspect is looked at by an audit committee. Okay. Then supervision of reporting. So basically, supervise overall reporting, including finance, IT. So all reporting, at least from an audit standpoint, comes under the audit committee. Access and communication. Head of internal audit and external audit representative are all basically access to the audit committee, because audit committee is the line of defense which basically looks at what all issues get raised during the audit and directs, right, corrective action in terms of what needs to be done and how it will be fixed. So that is the reason, the audit committee, basically the head of internal audit, or the external audit partner, or the representative external auditor, basically will all have access to the audit committee and will be able to raise any concerns or identify any issues at the audit committee stage itself. Right? Responsible for raising audit reports and concerns to the board of directors. Right? Audit charter. Audit committee is responsible for issuing the audit charter, defining the purpose, authority, and responsibility of internal and other audit activities, and establishes the internal audit function and emphasizes its independence from executive management. So basically, one of the primary responsibilities of an audit committee is ensuring that internal audit is done independently, because internal audit by its nature itself is done internally, right? It's done by the team which reports into management, who will actually decide their uh, pay and bonus amount. So that's the reason the internal audit team reports or has access directly to the audit committee, so that the independence cannot be undermined by anyone. Okay. So this is about the audit committee. and the importance of the audit committee. Now, next coming to the audit charter. So here we already looked at what are all the roles. One is, of course, the audit charter. So what is the purpose of the audit charter? Define the purpose, authority, and responsibility of internal audit activities and establish the internal audit function within the organization. Of course, typically today's world, audit charters are more, how do I say, enhanced, because they just don't talk about internal audit, they also talk about any other specific audits which need to be done, how an audit is to be done, who's going to be responsible, who's going to ask questions, how the KPIs are going to be fixed in terms of audit. So all that aspects are also coming in as part of the audit charter, right? Then components of audit charter basically must be approved by the higher level of management. Here, if the audit committee is the one who's responsible for the audit charter, so either they and the board of directors have to basically sign off on the audit charter and emphasize the independence of the internal audit function from executive management. As I said, basically that lays down guidelines as to how external auditors and internal auditors will be treated in terms of how access to data will be given, how access to information will be provided, how explanations will be made. So all that aspects also are basically part of the audit charter. And role in internal audit, again, serves as a guiding document for the internal audit process and ensures clarity in the scope and objectives of the audit activities. Engagement letters. So we looked at planning, basically the stages. We looked at audit committee, because audit committee is the one who's determining, who has to do, whom to appoint for doing in particular audit, who's going to do internal audit, which agency is going to do external audit. So all that is coming as part of the audit committee and the audit charter, right? Now let's say the auditor is appointed. You know who the auditor is. Okay, especially for external, this holds good for external auditors, because internal auditors are part of the organization. So typically they don't require to have an engagement letter because they're part of the organization. But external auditors are required to have engagement letters with the organization, defining their scope, defining all the various activities. So one of the main ones, right, is formalizes the delegation of audit tasks to external organizations and individuals. Here, basically, a engagement letter will lay down the scope, right, the responsibilities, the deliverables, the access to working papers, the how do I say, the boundary in terms of saying the responsibilities, basically who's going to be responsible for what, right? All that is basically part of the purpose of the engagement letter, right? Role in delegating audit tasks. So essential for organizations lacking in-depth knowledge of specific processes to hire trusted third parties for audits. So here, as I was mentioning, right, internal audit can be done either by a third party or internal or a hybrid. And what happens is, let's say, even if I'm hiring a third party to do supporting me in my internal audit or do my internal audit for me, then in that case also I will need to have an engagement letter, because it's a third party. I will need to have an engagement letter which basically defines the scope, the areas that they're going to cover, and what are the timelines and how the reporting is going to happen. Now, distinction from audit charter, of course, EL is more party-to-party contract, right? It focuses more on the roles and responsibilities, where the charter is primarily organizational audit governance. Outsourcing, okay. And we will discuss in outsourcing also, right? So one is increasingly common practice to outsource information systems assurance and security service through engagement letters. Yep. Yeah, Mrityunjay, go ahead. You raise your hand. Can't hear you. Okay, I see one question which came in chat as well. while defining the scope of the audit, what baseline should be considered. Again, it depends on the type of audit you are doing. Okay, so let's say if you're doing a standard ITGC, right, a standard IT controls audit, then your baseline will be defined by the areas that you have in scope, right? Change management, user access, and basis that you will say, okay, fine, these are my best practices, or these are the controls which are industry standard, or the baseline, and against that you will evaluate what the organization is doing. Similarly, let's say if you're doing an audit for compliance of GDPR or HIPAA or ISO, then your baseline will basically come from there. So again, it depends on the so at the scoping stage itself, this is done, this is required to be performed, and baseline typically is dependent on the type of certifications or sorry, the type of work that is being done. So type of audit which is being done. Okay. Yeah. So using the services of experts. Now, a lot of times, right, IS auditors also are required to use the work of experts, especially in cases where, let's say, it's very specialized. For example, cybersecurity, okay, penetration testing. So every IS auditor will not know or understand penetration testing. So basically, they have to get an external person to come in and do it, right? So in those cases, it says if you are relying on the work of an expert, you cannot blindly wash your hands off saying that I have relied on the work of an expert. They have said that okay, this is working or this is not working, and I'm good, right? So basically, there are certain guidelines which need to be followed for relying on the work of an expert. Sorry, was there a question? Okay. What we consider in the outsourcing, this is the auditing on the vendor supplier. So here, outsourcing primarily, I would say, globally, if you see, is basically for service organizations, third parties, right? Where, let's say, a part of the process, it could be payroll, it could be accounts receivable or payable, is outsourced to a third party, or it could be an IT related process, like let's say a data center. The servers are basically hosted by a third party data center, for example. Or let's say if you're on the cloud, okay, using AWS or Azure, and primary sort of processing is happening on the cloud. Or it could be basically using the support from a third party in terms of managing your IT, right? Or performing IT application development, performing user management. So all those activities, let's say if they're performed by a third party, then the, the audit also ideally is required to cover the work done by the third party also. Here, but in a lot of cases, what AICPA did was to mitigate that. They said, if let's say you're using a third party, right, and the third party has multiple customers, and if the third party is able to basically get a report from an independent auditor saying that the controls are designed and operating at the third party, right? So the third party in this case is called a service organization, right? And the organization which outsources the process is called the user organization because they're using the services. So when you have a service organization, if a service organization is hiring an independent auditor to come and look at their audit their function and basically report back, give that report to the service organization, which in turn will forward the report to the user organization. User organization is the main user organization, right? So if that report is basically provided, then it becomes outsourced, an outsourced audit, and that report is used by the primary auditor to basically say that yes, I have relied on a third-party audit, SOC audit report because it's a signed report from a CPA, and I have used that report to ensure that my existing process, right, which is happening, is fine. I hope that clarifies your query. Okay. So, okay, let's quickly cover this when we do some Q&A, right? Now, using the services of expert, consideration of outsourcing, IS assurance and security services. So, legal and regulatory. Understand the limitations imposed by law and regulations that may affect the outsourcing audit services. Okay, here I said, right, internal audit can be either done in-house by a in-house team, or it can be outsourced to a third party as well. So where you're outsourcing internal audit, you cannot say that because I've given it to a third party, my responsibility is over. If something goes wrong, it's the internal auditor or the third party who's responsible. No, the organization still carries the responsibility of the internal audit. It might have been outsourced to a third party who's basically supporting the organization in terms of doing the internal audit, or basically either they could be providing labor or resources, I would say, what we call the loan staff for doing the internal audit, or they could be taken it as an entire project itself. Well, they will only, the third party will come in and do the entire internal audit, right? So in those cases also, there are certain requirements, certain areas which are required to be, which can be outsourced, certain which cannot be outsourced. So organizations need to keep that in mind. Second is impact on audit. Evaluate how the audit charter influences overall and specific ISO audit objectives, ensuring alignment with organizational goals. Here, if let's say there are many changes in the charter, or basically they're in the sense, in terms of objectives, in terms of alignment, the third party also should be aligned with what you require them to do. Okay. If I'm giving it to, let's say, a third party, if I'm going into RSM or a BDO or a Deloitte to do my internal audit, okay, then they also should be aligned with exactly what is the purpose of me getting the internal audit done. What is my charter? What is the requirement, right? As an organization, what do I need to be audited for? What all do I need to report on? So that has to be clarified and basically made known to the service provider. Ensuring independence, this is very important, right? Again, auditor independence is non-negotiable. So basically, if let's say an auditor is doing an internal audit, they cannot do an external audit, and vice versa. So that's something which needs to be kept in mind. Yep. Go ahead.
Mr. Ta. Okay, sorry. I have a question here. So while outsourcing, remember I'm a fresher, so I'm going to ask even the lamest of questions. So while outsourcing, is it the responsibility of the head of the internal audit? Is he the one who assesses a need to outsource? And again, all these considerations we're looking at, does it mean he's the one who onboards and does all of this evaluation and make sure that they align with goals?
Okay, that's a great question. So again, as I said, the primary responsibility will always be with the audit committee. Okay, so audit committee may devolve it to the head of internal audit, saying that, okay, we are making you responsible for determining what is the best course, whether you want to outsource it or you want to keep people internal. So, but the head of internal audit cannot actually again send it down saying that I have appointed a third party, so they will basically be responsible. No, as you said, the responsibility will always remain with the head of internal audit, if there's an internal audit head, or let's say with the audit committee, right? So that responsibility cannot be shrugged off or basically given away by the internal audit head, even if there is a third party which is appointed to do the internal audit.
Thank you.
You had other questions as well, you said?
Oh, no, that was the only question I wanted to ask.
Okay. Right. Now, ensuring independence and objectivity, again, as I said, even if you're appointing somebody as the internal auditor, they still have to be independent in terms of that they are not actually doing some part of the process themselves. So let's say you have outsourced, the certain payroll processing or something to organization X, let's say KPMG, for example, or Accenture, for example. Okay. Now, you again go back to Accenture and say you do the internal audit, that will become a conflict of interest because they will end up auditing their own area. So that way, independence has to be maintained, right? Even though there is nothing stopping this one, but independence still has to be maintained in terms of an organization cannot be auditing its own self. or its own work rather. Okay, competence, very, very important. When you are actually hiring an expert, professional qualification, competence, skill has to be the three aspects that we saw. The same applies to the expert also, wherever we are outsourcing the work, right? Because the other person also has to have the same extent, same amount of skill, same amount of competence, same amount of qualification and knowledge in terms of doing the work, right? So ensure that they meet the necessary standards for effective auditing. Also, one of the aspects here it talks about is qualification of external auditors. The reason being that, let's say, if the organization is very large and they basically appoint a very small external auditor, then that person may not be able to even cover all the areas and have the requisite number of people to actually do a proper audit. So from that standpoint, professional competence is something which needs to be evaluated before outsourcing any specific work, right? So quickly, let's do some questions, right? Before we go on a break. Okay, right. First one. What is the primary purpose of an IS audit? Okay, I guess we can chat. Yeah. Who wants to?
Third is the right answer, I think so. To assurance on controls.
Okay. When we actually saw, right, the so one aspect of the questions is that when you typically questions in CISA are always two answers are always very will look always very right to you. So when we looked at the objectives also of audit purpose and the objectives, it also said ensure integrity and all that stuff as well, right? But yeah, provide assurance and controls. Okay, anyone else disagrees? Okay, two. Let me just join. Sorry. 3, 2. Anyone else? Right.
It shows whether our controls are properly designed and executed. So third is the
Okay. Yes. So if you see here as well, the primary purpose 3, provide assurance and controls. And IS audit primarily aims to provide independent assessment of the adequacy of internal controls. Okay. Then, which of the following is a key responsibility of an IS auditor? Designing new systems, ensuring compliance with laws and regulations, evaluating logical security controls, managing IT projects. Okay. Second, ensuring compliance. 2. Okay. Anyone else? All of you go with 2. Okay, awesome. So majority says 2. The answer is 3. The reason being that ensuring compliance with laws and regulations is not the auditor's responsibility. It's a management's responsibility. Okay. Organizations have to ensure compliance with laws. Auditors have to evaluate whether the organization has actually complied with laws and regulations. Okay. So this is a trick question. I know it basically on the face it looks like okay this one, but ensuring laws and regulations, compliance with laws is the management's responsibility. So in this case, then designing no, right? Managing no. Third would be the right answer. Correct. Evaluating and IS audit evaluates the adequacy of security controls to ensure they effectively protect information assets. Any thoughts on this? Okay. What is the main advantage of risk-based auditing? So we have not yet come to that.
Third is the right answer, right?
It focuses on the area of the greater risk. Okay, eliminate auditor judgment, reduces the audit scope significantly, ensures all risks are covered equally. Okay. So I have 3. I have 3. Okay, very good. So let's.
Because we always start with the high risk areas, now.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. That is also true. It focuses on areas with the greatest risk. It ensures all areas are covered equally. If it is equal, then typically we will not go for risk based, right? You just take it
Yeah.
everything as it is. So okay. Right. So what is the answer? 3. Yeah. It focuses on areas with the greatest risk because prioritizes areas like ensuring resources are used efficiently and effectively. Okay. We'll come to others as well. So there are a lot of questions here. What we'll do is we'll take out some time tomorrow once we have covered all this areas in this domain, right? And try to solve, because if you see the question bank, there are almost 200 odd questions. Oops, sorry. There are 200 odd questions which are there. So we'll anyway try and cover once we cover the decks as well. So now I know it's 8:31 by my watch, India time. So we'll come back in 10 minutes or a little more. Okay, 10 minutes is fine. Okay. Okay. I hope everyone's back. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. While everyone is preparing to get back, may I ask, is it possible that at the end of the training we'll get a recording? Because I don't know if it's on my side, but there's a bad reception, or whether it's just the connection itself. So
Okay.
will the recording be made available?
Yes, I can check with the team, but yeah, normally after a few hours when the recording basically comes in, I think they'll share it on the group.
All right. Okay. Yeah, because
So
it's a bit scratchy. Even now, as you speak, it's a bit scratchy.
Okay. Is it the same for everyone?
No. No.
Okay. Oh, that's great to hear. Thanks. Okay, but yeah, the recording will be available after the session ends, right? Maybe after a few hours, once the recording uh, is basically comes in from the recording gets stored in the Google Drive, we'll then share it. The team will basically share the link in the WhatsApp chat itself. Okay. So now coming to audit planning steps, right? Typically, how? So we've looked at various what are the stages, right? When we come basically to the audit, how do we start? We have the audit committee, we have the charter, then we have an external agency if required, right? So now we come to the planning. Okay. All that is done. Now we know that a planning needs to be done. It could be an internal audit or it could be an external audit. It doesn't matter. Basically, now I have been appointed as an auditor, right, to basically do the IS audit. So how am I going to now start? So of course, the first is define the audit subject, right? This is the most important aspect because identify the area to be audited through risk assessment to prioritize focus areas. And this is very, very critical because a risk assessment allows you to identify areas of higher focus, greater focus, which you saw in the questions as well, right? Apart from that, it also allows us to narrow down the areas that we really need to look at. Now, one practical example that I used to see, right? So let's say as an external auditor, one of the critical areas is sales, right? Sales of products or services, whatever it is, right? Now, sale is not a straightforward thing, right? It will be basically under sales also you will have domestic sales, you'll have export sales, that you might have, some other different sales, and then finally you have scrap sales, right? Sale of scrap and other material. So if let's say your scrap sales is constituting only 1% or 2% of the total sales, right? And it is supported by a different application. Would you actually focus from an IT audit, IS audit standpoint? Would you focus on that particular area or that application in detail? Would it be a high risk for you? So those are certain questions, right, which are actually asked at this particular stage. And considering that, when I say, okay, I want to, there is a concept of materiality in audit typically. When we look at audit, see, not from an IT standpoint, but from a financial audit standpoint, there is a concept called materiality. Now, materiality basically says that if there is an amount above which, okay, materiality basically is amount based, and it is that amount, right, above which if a user of the financial statement might make a decision, or rather would have, or rather might be compelled to make a decision, or would make a decision. For example, I find a 100 rupee error in the financial statements, or rather I find a 100 rupee error in the financial statements of a 10,000, of a $100 million company, I find a, let's say, different or a error of $100. Would that be, if you as a shareholder, would it matter to you? That's the question, right? So above what amount would it matter to you to basically start taking a call on your holdings in a particular organization? So that amount threshold is basically called materiality. And typically anything below materiality is also not considered from an audit standpoint, unless and until it's a regulatory thing. From an audit standpoint, anything below materiality is typically not considered. Okay, unless there is a high fraud risk or there is any other concern. Yeah.
So how materiality is reached? I mean, how we decide the materiality? Like,
See, from an IS audit standpoint, we don't, because again, as I said, that's more from a financial audit standpoint. So those materiality is typically defined by financial auditors, or even at an organization level by the internal audit team who's looking at it from a financial standpoint. From an IS audit standpoint, it is important because it allows us to look at systems, right, which or rather through which data flows, and that data flow is material or not. So let's say if I have a system, right, if I have an application which is basically processing data, and the impact of which is just going to be, let's say, $10,000, right, out of a $1 billion company, or $1 million out of a $1 billion company, then typically it will not be material for me, right? A 1 million amount will not be material. I'm not saying that it is not important. I'm just saying it's not material, right? And hence, as an auditor, if the financial auditor decides that this amount need not, my materiality limit is, let's say, 1 million, and anything below that I'll not consider, then as an IS auditor, you can say, okay, if this application processes transactions less than 1 million, I can then actually ignore this particular application, or I can scope out this particular application, not ignore, but scope out that particular application. So that's typically the role of materiality, and that is where area, right, audit defining the audit subject, defining the scope actually comes in. Yes, absolutely they do, especially when you are looking at external audit, right? Okay, when you are looking at external audit, when you're looking at or especially when you're doing it as part of external audit, or even when you're doing it as part of internal audit, right? How do you determine what you're going to test? See, any organization, if you take, will have at least, in today's world, right, any organization will have at least 20 or 30 systems. Are you going to actually audit all of them, or are you going to do only those which matter, right, from an operation standpoint or from a financial standpoint? And how will you take that call? How will you determine which application do I look at or which I don't look at? So there you do need the help of the financial audit team, because they will look at materiality and determine, okay, these applications process transactions below materiality, these applications process above materiality, or these transactions are purely manually focused, even if they are happening in the system. So the IT application need not be considered. So there are a lot of factors which actually come in when you work with financial audit team, and hence it actually goes hand in hand. Yeah, see, 5% and 2%, I agree, but again, it depends on case to case, right? These are industry benchmarks in terms of what audit firms typically use. But yeah, it's like 5% of revenue, 2% of total assets. So there are various ways which it's computed and used. So it does go hand in hand. Okay, and yeah, I forgot to mention, I am also a chartered accountant. So I did in my earlier avatar, before I became a CISA, deal with financial audits, including materiality, including scoping of financial statements. So in case
I have another question.
Sure, please go ahead.
So let's say if we are ignoring the 1% or 2%, and let's say the materiality is very less for that particular application, but what happens if there's a data breach that's happening and we ignored it in the first place?
Okay, so that's a great point, but you have to look at the purpose of the audit, right? If the purpose of the audit is, let's say, reliance assurance on the financial statement and controls, right? Then you are looking at the major ones. And even if there is a data breach, right? That data breach threshold is below the amount, below your materiality amount. So hence, again, you will not be held responsible for it unless and until you are aware that this application had a data breach and you did not test it. Then yes, it would be our responsibility and IS audit responsibility. But if let's say you have excluded it because it's below the materiality threshold and subsequently there's a data breach, then you still performed the audit procedures which you would have actually, in the sense you have performed the appropriate audit procedures. So in the absence of any contrary information, if you have excluded those basis materiality, basis the normal audit practices that are being followed, then we're in the clear. It's not an issue.
Taha, so I just have one question. So in finance audit, we usually follow the reasonable assurance approach. So same thing we follow over here also as an IS auditor, like the reasonable assurance thing, right?
Okay, so reasonable assurance, yes, because the reason rather we call it reasonable assurances because we do sampling, right? Unless and until you are giving an opinion on 100%, okay, you will never call it complete assurance because you're not giving on 100%, right? Even let's say even a year, I have 1,000 user access requests and I have, basis my sampling, I have seen let's say 25. So I'm only looking at a sample out of a total population. So hence, yes, what we do also is reasonable assurance also. So CISA and IS auditor also, when they give the report, it's standalone. Let's say if an IS auditor is doing an IT audit, their auditor will, the CISA report also will talk about reasonable assurance. It's a great point actually. We'll come to that as well, but it's a good point. Okay, so first is once we define the audit subject, right? What exactly we're going to audit, then what are the audit objectives, right? Now here, as I said, if the purpose of the audit matters, your audit objectives get defined by what exactly are you, what exactly is the purpose of the audit. If it's let's say an external audit from a financial statement standpoint, then my audit objectives would be more like looking at one is of course from an IT standpoint, I might look at user access, I might look at change management, but I will not look at data privacy per se. Yep. Okay. Even if the breach is related to, let me see the question. Sorry. He related to out of scope application or system, but the breach was the company to breach the law. Again, as I said, right, it depends on the purpose of the audit. If the purpose of the audit is financial statements and the breaches happened, let's say in the research system, then when it is not even in my scope, then I cannot be held responsible for it as an IS auditor. If I were aware that a breach happened in the research system, but that research system has nothing to do with my financial statements in terms of data or in terms of anything, then it's still not a problem, right? So again, the purpose matters. Okay, that's why I said formulate audit objectives, right? So set clear goals, basis what exactly I am auditing. Now determine the scope, specify the systems, functions, or units to be reviewed, right? In accordance, aiding in resource management and identifying necessary resources for the audit. So this is the stage where we actually start saying, I'm going to look at 10 applications, for example. Okay, 10 is, it depends again on the size, but yeah, I'm going to, let's say, typically it's maybe around 3 or 4 applications realistically normally for most of the organizations. So when you're looking at 3 or 4 applications, then you will have, along with the applications, you will look at, let's say, operating system, you will look at databases, you will look at Active Directory also at an organization level, right? So if that is going to be the scope, then okay, fine, this is the systems, this is what I'm going to test. So how many people will I need? How many locations? How many servers, right? So basis that, the planning is done in terms of how many people how many hours would it typically take? And that comes from experience, mostly. And considering the hours and the timeline, we would say how many resources would ideally be needed, right? So it is budgeting and all comes in. Okay. Real life example. So I'll take an example of, let's say, sales. Okay, let's use this. Look at this 5. Then I'll give an example. Okay. Uh, so determine the scope, right? I have done the budgeting. Now develop the audit strategy. So create a strategy for the audit process, including selection of approach and methodology. So here again, approach and methodology is also guided by the purpose. If you're doing an internal audit, then the approach and methodology is something which is defined from an organization standpoint. If you're doing an external audit, approach and methodology gets defined by the standard under which you're auditing. So let's say if it's SOX, then approach and methodology will align with the requirements of PCAOB. That's the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, again, in the US, which defines what auditors, how auditors actually should audit. So that's the job of the PCAOB, especially for listed organizations. So here your approach, let's say if you're doing a cybersecurity audit, then your approach and methodology will be aligned to the purposes of the audit, right? Looking at whether organization has sufficient breach notification rules, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, so all those aspects. So your audit strategy is basically defined by the purpose of the audit, and again, exactly what is the approach and methodology that you're going to follow. And finally, logistics accommodation. These are again, more of administrative things in terms of how the planning is going to happen, in terms of what are the weekly cadence calls that are going to happen, how the walkthroughs are going to be scheduled, right? What are basically, again, one aspect is saying accommodation, but yeah, in case you have to travel, how the traveling is going to happen, how is the timeline going to be fixed with the client. So all that basically is in part of the logistics and accommodation. So how typically, let's say, it gets done from an external audit standpoint? I am, let's say, auditing for company X. Now, company X is into the manufacture of, let's say, medicines, for example. Okay, they are into the manufacture of medicine. They are also into the manufacture of pharma ingredients, that is APIs. So ideally, when I look at, as a financial auditor, when I look at the financial statements, right, what are going to be my main areas? One is, of course, sales. Second is going to be procurement of raw materials, right? Again, third is going, of course, multiple areas, right? One is going to be payroll, okay? One is going to be, the logistics, because supply chain, medicines and all, right? Another is going to be, let's say, the fees which are paid to doctors, because it's a pharma company, right? Discount given. So all that aspects are basically my major expenses or major areas which I'm going to focus on. Now, how I'm going to do is, for each area, right, I will look at what are the applications that the organization uses. So for example, the organization is using an ERP called SAP. Now, SAP is a end-to-end product. Basically, it has modules ranging from FICO, that is finance control, right? Materials management, sales and distribution, production planning, payroll, that is HRIS, HR, then also asset inventory, sorry, FI, SD, and various other modules. Planning, basically the maintenance as well, plant production, PM, the plant maintenance part, right? And what happens is, I know that the organization uses SAP, right? They basically have these modules. Now, why the reason I'm talking about modules is because if it is sales, then basically sales comes through SD, that is sales and distribution module, and the finance module, because whatever your sale order activity, your actual invoice generation, right, credit limit check, in terms of if I'm giving credit to customers, then whether, how is the credit history, what is the credit limit, what is the inventory position, what is the pricing that can be given. So all that aspects basically are happening through the SD module. And whenever the transaction, whenever the sale finally happens, right, then that sale gets recorded in the finance module. Similarly, when the money comes in, when the collections happen, get recorded in the finance module. So that means SAP as an application is something that I need to consider, because my primary area of audit, right, is basically happening through SAP. Now, similarly, because SAP is an ERP, all my other expenses also, like my payroll, like my raw material procurement, my costing, right, all that is happening through SAP. So SAP is something that I'm definitely going to consider. Now, apart from that, I'm also using an application which tracks my, or rather, I have, let's say, various retail outlets where I'm selling my own medicines. Okay, that is also possible. Where I'm selling my products, I may have a tab with retail outlets, and there I have another application called point of sale, basically which captures my sales, and that data then flows into SAP, right, for recording the transactions. So typically, although SAP is having all the data, all the transaction records, but point of sale also has invoice generation. There, my data is captured in terms of price master, invoice generation, collections. All that is happening in my point of sale as well. So hence, that although it is a secondary application, I will still consider it because there is where direct transaction processing is happening. Of course, the accounting and all is done in SAP. So my numbers are still coming in from SAP only, right? So though that is how typically my initial scoping will happen. Now, considering my initial scoping, I will say, okay, I have looked at SAP. Now, what are the primary risks when it comes to an ERP? So I will look at risk in terms of access, risk in terms of unauthorized changes, that is change management, risk in terms of backup, okay, with data, maybe not risk data integrity, right? Risk in terms of logical security, in terms of passwords. So I will then identify my critical risks. Against that, I will basically plot the controls, and then I will do the planning saying, okay, this is the application, this is the areas, this is the risk, this is the controls, and this is the amount of effort that I'm going to need. 100 hours, 200 hours, 500 hours, depending on the application size, depending on the locations. And basis that, then I will say these many hours, I need to complete the audit in 2 months. That means I need X number of people, right? And that's basically how my initial planning happens. Now it comes to approach, as I said, approach and methodology is basically where I'm saying I'm going to use sampling. Okay, for certain areas, I'm basically going to do sampling, right? It could be random sampling, it could be haphazard, it could be judgmental. I'm going to use sampling. Certain areas, I'm going to look at configurations directly. So that's where my entire approach also comes in, how I'm actually going to do the audit, right? And of course, subsequently, the testing part comes, which will anyway cover at the time of field work. So, but this is basically how practically a audit gets scoped, and I would say real world example of how a financial statement is seen, how an application is identified, basis that how the area supporting that application is identified. So one aspect I'll tell you, let's say I said SAP, right? Now that SAP servers are sitting in a third-party data center, okay, and the third-party data center is responsible for physical security, but I am still responsible for the logical security, including operating system and database as well. So for the physical security part, since there are two options available, either I can go to the data center and see the security, or I can ask the data center to provide me a report from an independent auditor saying what are the security controls that they have, and then I can plug it in my process. So that is how second, the basically approach will keep on changing, or the risks and the areas will also keep on changing depending on the circumstances, depending the applications, as I said, depending on the locations, depending on the where the control actually resides. Any questions on this? Okay, I'll move to the next. Please let me go if I'm going too fast.
I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned about the additional resources if the audit committee is not well versed with certain area, let's say pen testing. So would that be included in the audit planning steps, or would that be a part of next steps?
No, audit planning itself. So as you said, one of the areas as an auditor, right, I'm trying to determine whether the organization is doing a vulnerability assessment and pen testing. Now, let's say the organization says they do pen test, but as an auditor, I don't understand pen test, right? Because it's a very technical report, for example. Okay, so in that case, I might need to get in somebody who understands that. So that's an expert, right? It's a third party. It could be a CEH or it could be someone else. So that I will decide at the planning stage itself, saying that I might need to involve, let's say, a ethical hacker or a CEH or somebody in a team to basically come in and look at this particular reports. Similarly, let's say I'm doing testing for IPEs, that is custom reports, information produced by the entity, and that involves looking at a lot of code. So I might not be versed with understanding code, right? So I might say I will get somebody who understands SQL or understand language to come in and to basically support in terms of understanding only that particular part. So even if I am how do I say, using someone else, I will very clearly define the area that that person is going to help me with and what is the objective of getting that person involved. So let's say if it's a ethical hacker, then yeah, only for vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, nothing else. Similarly, for a coder, it will be more for understanding the report logic, right? That's it. But the responsibility of how the result will be used or evaluated is still mine. I cannot say, no, I got a ethical hacker, so that entire process is out. No. Responsibility still remains mine. I am just using their expert opinion to get more insight or understand areas where I will not be able to, I don't have the necessary skills or competence.
Okay, got it.
Right?
Thank you.
Thanks. Now, coming to the next, risk-based auditing. Okay. So typically, again, if you look at ISACA also, they recommend doing risk-based auditing because one is it focuses on evaluating processes or potential audits based on risk assessment. For audits based on risk assessment, right? Because as an organization, right, all organizations are, or rather do have certain risks, and basis those risks, they actually put in processes to address or mitigate those particular risks. So from an auditor standpoint also, as an auditor, you are basically evaluating the processes to identify areas of major risk so that you can concentrate more there, and where the area is actually very least risk, you might take a call to even ignore that as well. So that's the whole concept. Process evaluation is identify all processes that may be subject to an audit and perform a risk assessment. For each process, determine overall risk. Okay, one point to note here is, although I am looking at processes with the highest risk, but to do that, I still need to look at, when I'm doing an assessment, I should consider everything when I'm doing an assessment. So it's like I look at all the processes. When I say look means I understand from the client. It could be either through discussions, it could be either through previous year work papers, right? It could be through looking at certain policies of the organization to understand, okay, what are the processes, and against each of the process, the best. Another way is doing how typically we do it in external or internal audit also is you look at something called as a trial balance. A trial balance is basically a list of all the accounts against which there is a financial amount. Because whatever activity you do in an organization, it has a financial impact, right? So it has to get recorded somewhere. So I will pick up everywhere where there is some money spent, and against each of that head, I will determine, is this something which is having a higher risk or a lower risk? Basically club it into a particular process. So this particular account, either it could be part of sale, it could be part of inventory, it could be part of assets, it could be part of loans. So whatever it is, right, I'll classify it, and then basis that I will say, is this, now what is the risk associated with this? Is it a high risk or a low risk? If it's a low risk, how low is the risk? If it's very low and it's below the materiality, I may say I will not even test it, right? Or I will not even consider it. If it is high, even if the risk is low but it is above materiality, I may test it. If the risk is high and it is above materiality, then I will definitely test it, but with additional focus. So that's typically an approach, right? On audit plan development is, once the assessment has been done, then an audit plan is built, right? Prioritizing processes rated as high risk. And here, okay, one clarification here is, it is not just high risk, it is high risk and normal risk as well. But yes, priority is given to high risk, and incorporate both short-term and long-term planning considerations. So basically, what means short-term and long-term is certain activities happen on a regular basis. For example, sales, right? They will happen on a daily basis or a weekly basis, whereas certain activities may happen annually, okay, or very infrequent. So let's say valuation of something, or so whatever, it could be an activity which is not happening very regularly. It is either half yearly or a yearly activity. So that activity I will only plan for the time when the activity actually happens. Yeah. Anyone has anything to add? Saurav, you're unmuted. You want to say something?
No, that happens by mistake, maybe.
Okay. No worries. Okay. So clear on the risk-based part. Basically, it's focusing on areas with the, basically prioritizing based on risk, right? Identify all the processes, right? Do a risk assessment, and then prioritize. And when you plan, if your area is of high risk, but the process maybe happens once or twice a year, then accordingly you will still have to look at it. Of course, it will be at the time when the process actually happens. But if it is within your audit period, then it has to be considered. Okay. Audit universe and planning types. Audit universe is nothing but all the processes and areas that may be subjected to an audit, and provides a framework for identifying and prioritizing audit targets based on risk assessment. So universe is everything, right? Universe encompasses everything. Basically, considering the universe, then I decide, okay, what exactly I want to look at, and then do it, right? So planning type, short-term planning, focus on audit issues to be covered within the year. Long-term planning is considered risk-related issue influenced by the organization's strategic direction, including any changes in the direction. So here, one typical example I'll give you. When we say long-term planning here also, so you heard about verification of assets, right? To physically verify whether you have the assets with you, right? So it's physical verification of, it could be IT assets, it could be any assets. Organizations typically undertake this type of an exercise once in every 2 years or 3 years. Okay, that's a common process everywhere across, typically across the globe. So it's either done once in 2 years or 3 years. Now, when you do a planning, right, when you're doing, but when you test for assets, you still test it every year, correct? Because your numbers are coming in, your depreciation, your new procurements, your sale of assets, all that come in. And that basically impacts my asset system also, right? It impacts my ERP, which wherein all my fixed assets are actually captured and all my transactions are stored. So what happens is, if I'm doing my verification once in 2 years or 3 years, then this year, at least I will look at the system to see whether there were any transactions made, although they're not supposed to be any, and which is the next cycle, which is it's going to be done, and accordingly documented in my plan saying that next year, if I am basically doing this audit, then this area will need to be considered, right? So that's more from a long-term standpoint. Short-term is nothing but all the normal areas which you typically do. That's what we cover. Long-term also, as I said, refers to during the year, if I'm covering an area, but that's going to happen, let's say at the end of the year or something, then that also needs to be accordingly planned. So understand business mission objectives and processes, understand business environment, risks, challenges, and changes, right? Review previous year work reports. As I was mentioning, right, you can look at organizations' policies and process, you can look at previous year work papers, you can do inquiry with the organization to understand basically what is the process, what all is in scope and not in scope, right? Review policy standards, understand laws and regulations. Here again, when you say understand laws and regulations, we are not responsible for ensuring compliance. We only look at what are the laws which apply to that particular organization, right? So let's say an organization in the US is required to comply with HIPAA, okay, Healthcare Information, Portability Act, protection and portability, right? So in that scenario, what as an auditor we look at is whether the organization has the right set of IT controls to meet the requirements of HIPAA. But whether they ensure compliance, it's not my responsibility. I just need to ensure that they have the requisite, organization has the requisite systems in place to comply with HIPAA. Okay. Understand org structure, very, very important. Org structure helps you to determine a lot of things, even for IT. Okay. If an org structure is not defined appropriately, you will have a lot of issues in terms of segregation of duties, in terms of approval flow, workflows. So that becomes a big challenge when you want to actually test those particular controls. Perform a risk assessment to identify high areas of risk, right? Set the scope and objectives, develop the audit strategy, and finally build the audit team. We have already discussed this. So any questions on this slide? No. What are the various audit types? As I was saying, right, I was giving an example of financial audit mostly. But here the most common ones are given. One is financial audit, assess the integrity of financial records and accounting practices against established standards. Nothing but when a financial auditor is giving an opinion on the financial statements, right? Say true and fair, reasonable assurance, true and fair, that is in comparison to something. So here either it could be in comparison to standards issued by the AICPA or accounting standards issued by the ICAI in India. So basis that they give their opinion. So even for a financial audit, when they're giving an opinion, the numbers are coming in from somewhere, right? If they're coming in from IT systems, then those IT systems are required to be tested. Similarly, operational audit, if let's say the audit involves looking at operational efficiencies or operational processes, or looking at whether a process is working the way it is designed to work. So in that scenario also, if let's say the activities are happening through an application, okay. For example, let's say my processing, when I'm doing my inventory, okay, when I enter my inventory values, correct, and the system basically is capturing automated whatever quantity is taken in, whatever output comes out, there are automated PLCs which basically capture the transactions which happen. For example, I was looking at, let's say, a few years back, I was looking at a gas supplier, basically, who supplies LPG to LPG or LNG rather, right? Who store LNG and then supply it to various this one. So the material which comes in gets captured. How many quantity of gas has actually come in? How much is going out, right? Which pipes it is coming? Which ship has gotten how much quantity? So that basically there are automated PLCs because you can't actually measure, right? So you'll have gauges which actually say how much quantity has flown. So we test that system to understand that can it be tampered, right? Who has access to basically modify the values of that particular system. So all that also is part of operational audit. So that also gets determined when we do an assessment, right? And that is one type of audit which is typically done. Then a typical information systems audit, right? Where the client has asked you to evaluate their IT system, whether it meets the requirements from a baseline perspective, right? It could be user access, change management. Are the controls in alignment with the industry best practices, right? So if you see examine information systems to ensure they safeguard assets, maintain integrity, availability, provide reliable information, achieve organizational goals, and use the resources efficiently. So in this scenario also, we understand from the client what systems they want covered, do the audit, and provide an opinion. Integrated audit is primarily more in terms of collaborative teams of auditors with diverse skill sets to produce a comprehensive report. Here, let's say if you're working with on an area, let's say due diligence, for example, company A wants to buy company B, right? And company A, because it is buying company B, it wants to understand that company B's systems are actually, reliable. They are basically having the right set of controls. It's not that everything is manipulated in the system. Anybody can go and make any changes. So in those cases, you basically work with an integrated team in terms of people who are experts in valuation, people who are experts in financial audit, people like us who are experts, let's say, in IT audit. So that's why it's more of an integrated audit or a different type of audit, basically. Okay, statements on auditing standards. So up to here, we have basically looked at the types, the planning, the types of various audits. Now we're basically coming to how should I do the audit? What do I need to keep in mind when I'm doing the audit? Is there any standards or something which is defined by some body which I need to adhere to when actually I'm doing my audit, or basically the areas which I'm basically in scope, determining areas in scope, right? So AICPA in the US has come up with statements on auditing standards, which are basically used as guidance, ASBs, right, on how to conduct audit engagements. Similarly, in fact, here it says AICPA. PCAOB also has its own accounting and auditing standards, which determine how auditors should actually test, or how auditors should basically do an audit, right? Right from planning to field work to documentation. Okay, so basically, auditing standards define the purpose on how an audit should be carried out. The key areas covers planning, evidence gathering, internal controls, communication with management, and reporting, right? And ensures auditors adhere to established standards for consistency and quality. Now, this is very important because a set of standards will ensure that you do audit for a oil and gas, or you do audit for software, or even let's say you do audit for a cloud provider. The standards that you're going to use are still going to remain the same, right? The quality standards that you're going to use, the way that you're going to plan, you're going to do, basically do planning, do scoping, do testing, is still going to be the same from an approach and methodology perspective, right? Of course, manufacturing, oil and gas will have its own nuance, a cloud provider have its own nuance, but here basically standards ensure that the way you approach and the way you do is the same across any type of organization. Importance in auditing: maintains professionalism on our audit process, because trust me, this, now one question was that, let's say if there was a breach, right, and we missed it because we thought it is a less critical application, then how do we escape liability? This is the way. If the standard says that, you can use materiality as a base to determine what needs to be considered, what needs to be basically considered as in audit, what can be excluded, then you can use that also as a base, saying that, look, the system which had a breach was way below the materiality threshold, was hence not required to be covered, and the standard says that I can take that call, right? I'm allowed to basically exclude certain things, and hence this is where I have used my professional judgment, and I'm not liable. Okay, so that's the reason this basically helps. The standards help, maintains professionalism, and facilitates compliance with different auditing standards across countries, right? Including information systems audit. Any questions on this? Okay. Now, another aspect is process and product audits, right? So what's a process audit? Basically, evaluate activities against published requirements, ensure that processes are followed, meet established standards, and include business impact analysis and process engineering. This is nothing but, let's say, when you are looking at an audit for a particular process, or sort of you're doing a process audit. This is apart from the financial audit. Let's say you're looking at efficiency in a particular process. You're looking at whether the process is giving the working as described, right, or as designed. The process is basically working as designed. In that case, a process audit is done, basically to evaluate activities against published requirements. Okay, and the processes are basically followed as they're supposed to be done, supposed to be followed. Whereas in a product audit, right, it's more against attributes against design specifications, okay, verifies product aligned with design, and check functional criteria. So here, because it's a product, right, you're basically going to say what is the purpose of that particular product. If that purpose is the purpose of the product met, is it in line, is the production of the, or rather the product is in line with the criteria. So for example, from an IT audit standpoint, you can see if I'm evaluating a particular application, is the application doing the work it was intended to do, right? Why did I buy that application? Is it actually doing that, right? Are there sufficient controls covering this particular product, okay? And is it in line with the intended design? So let's say my policy says that password length should be 10. So is the setting in the application also at 10, or is it something else, right? So that is where that comes in. And check functional criteria. Basically, if the product is supposed to do X, is it actually doing that X? Okay. Next is forensic and technical certification audits. These are again various type of audits, right? So forensic audits is basically focused on discovering fraud and crimes. Okay. One area which is also very specialized and where IT auditors also play a very important role is forensic audits, right? Because a lot of times forensic audits are basically, forensic auditors are rather called in when, let's say, there is a fraud which has happened, or there's a breach. For example, we discussed on breach, right? So there's a breach which has happened, and a detailed analysis needs to be done to understand what led up to it, right? How did it actually happen? When I want to do root cause analysis, how did it happen? What are all the activities which were done? Correct? Is it still being done, or is it over now? So those activities, let's say when a forensic audit needs to be done, then also an IT auditor is called upon to support wherever, let's say, they want to do an analysis of emails or analysis of transactions, right? Analysis of access logs, analysis of change records. So all that basically comes under forensic audit as well, right? So here, as you see, last one, specialized in identifying irregularities and illegal acts. Technical certification audits are again more in terms of formal testing against standards, evaluate system management and configuration, ensures compliance with established criteria. So especially when you look at a pharma industry, they do have something called as computer system validation, where for the applications, or rather the systems which are used by pharma companies, let's say from a quality standpoint, from a research standpoint, from a quality control standpoint, right? They will be definitely using some systems and some applications. So there is a requirement of an auditor actually coming, looking at those standards which are defined as part of, let's say, the GMP, the good manufacturing practices, or the CSV process, and mapping it to the process which is actually followed by the organization, and ensuring that, or rather, giving an opinion whether it matches or there are any gaps. If my GMP or good manufacturing practice says X, am I doing X or am I doing Y? Right? So that is something which is basically part of technical certification audits. Administrative audit, these are basically more, okay, this, when you look at ISO, right, when we'll come to what is ISO as well. So when you look at policies, procedures, it basically comes under administrative audit. Typically in today's world, administrative audit as a standalone one is rare. Mostly it will be done with, let's say, some specific audit. So I want to do audit for ISO, if I'm doing audit for high trust, if I'm doing audit for, let's say, looking at compliance with GDPR. So those cases, administrative audit also comes in, because I am looking at the policies, procedures, and their alignment with the requirement, regulatory requirements or compliance requirements. Compliance audits, again, as the name itself suggests, it's more to look at compliance. Let's say as an organization, I gave an example of HIPAA, right? Healthcare Information Portability Act, right? And portability and accountability, basically, it's an act which governs medical data of US citizens, right? How basically it is capped, how it is documented, and how breaches are communicated. So that itself has a set of guidelines in terms of what IT controls should an organization have, what type of administrative controls, what type of logical controls, what type of physical controls. And a compliance audit typically will basically say, okay, this is my requirement, and this is the client's process. Is it aligned? Yes, client is compliant. If it is not aligned, the client is non-compliant. So basically, compliance audit will have a very straightforward, you know, opinion in terms of saying compliant or not compliant. Again, it will be area wise, depending on the regulation that I'm looking at. Surveillance audits are more done where when a recertification or when a surveillance audits are more common in ISO, where if an organization, let's say, gets an ISO certification. So the first year there is a detailed audit where the certifying body comes in, does an audit, gives an ISO certificate, right? And when I say ISO, it is basically, let's say, 27001, dealing more with information security or information systems, right? And in that scenario, let's say first year the audit is done. Now, second year again, so ISO typically is applicable for 3 years, for example. Okay. So first year and second year, again, somebody is not going to come in and do the whole thing, right? So that is why where surveillance audit comes in, where an auditor basically comes in, looks at certain critical areas, let's say, where there were findings or where there are certain higher risks, and ensures that, okay, fine, is it more or less, working or not working, in the sense, is the organization following the same process or is there a deviation? Purpose of surveillance audits is ensure ongoing compliance with established practices and routine checks between certification and recertification. So as certification is in year 1, recertification will happen in year 3. So between end of year 1 and end of year 2, somebody still has to come and look, right, whether there are any major changes, is the process still followed. So those are called surveillance audits. The reason we are saying separately is because typically the sample size, the testing and all for surveillance audit is very low, right? It's only for basic minimum activities, and the sample size also is typically low. Okay. So we discussed the type of audits, we discussed planning. Now, one of the aspects we had discussed earlier was around ethics, right? Code of ethics. And ISACA has defined a code of ethics, professional ethics, which need to be followed by each and every single CISA. In fact, it's supposed to be followed by each and every member, but here, because we're dealing with CISA, it is required to be followed by each and every system, every single certified information system auditor as well. So what does it say? Applicable to ISACA members and certification holders, right? Adherence is part of the certification process. Non-compliance can lead to certificate revocation, right? So adherence is part of the certification process means that when you are basically doing your day-to-day work as part of IT audit, correct, then you have to comply with the ISACA code of professional ethics. Either you could be a member, you might not have a certification also. Still, if you are a member, you need to comply. And even if you have a certification, you still need to comply. Core statements: compliance basically supports standards for effective governance of enterprise information systems and professional conduct. Act with objectivity, due care, and due diligence. Now, these are very important terms. Objectivity means that you're looking at something objectively. You're not looking at it from a biased point of view, right? You're looking at it from as a neutral observer would look at. So objectivity. Due care and due diligence is nothing but you would basically take the same amount of care if it were your own system, right? So that's basically what it is. Stakeholder interests: serve stakeholders lawfully while monitoring high standards of conduct, while maintaining high standards of conduct, and avoid actions that could discredit the profession or ISACA. Okay, so none of these activities are permitted. Importance of adherence: ensures integrity and trust in the profession, upholds the reputation of ISACA and its members. So if you do anything which basically tarnishes the image of ISACA, then they definitely do take strict action. It could be anywhere in the world. Okay. Now this is another framework which has been developed by ISACA. Basically the IT assurance framework, ITAF. Okay. And what are the components of ITAF? One is, of course, standards, mandatory requirements for conducting IS audits, ensuring compliance and quality, sorry, right? So, see, what do you mean by a framework? So, framework at home, let's say if I want to build a building, right? I want to build an apartment, I want to build a house or an apartment. I need to have a foundation and I need to have a frame, right? I need to have a structure. That structure foundation will be basically with pillars, and structure will basically also be pillars and whatever slabs, whatever you want to call it, correct? And on that, basically, once that foundation is done, then you will basically build your walls, distribute your rooms, your kitchen, whatever you're doing. So that's basically the foundation. Similarly, from an IT audit and IT control standpoint, an ITAF basically helps in terms of determining what I should consider when I'm doing an IT audit. So as I was saying, right, change management, user access, data backup, incident management. So those are basically certain items which form part of the framework, and in that you basically look at whatever needs to be done from an audit standpoint. Guidelines, support and advice for implementing standards effectively, including examples for auditors. Right? It basically says how you should test a specific area. Now, role in IS audit activities, audit procedures, framework for planning, executing and reporting on audits, enhancing the effectiveness of audit processes, and tools and techniques, resources available for auditors to facilitate the audit quality, the audit process, and improve efficiency. Here, basically, it says the framework itself gives you live examples, gives you a frame of reference against which you can have your benchmark your controls with the client's activities and see whether it is in line, right? So that is where it basically helps. And importance of adherence, ensure that auditors maintain ethics, independence, and objectivity while conducting audits, ultimately supporting organizational integrity and accountability. Simple words, auditors maintain their objectivity, their independence, their professional skepticism. Okay. Audit standards and guidelines. So what are audit standards? Definition, mandatory requirements that auditors must follow during evaluation. Key components include elements such as reporting, engagement planning, risk assessment, and professional independence. Key components, right? So audit standards will basically say how a report should be done, how engagement planning should be done, how risk assessment should be done, and how professional independence should be maintained. So ISACA standards include audit charter, engagement planning, reporting, organizational independence, and finally risk assessment and planning. No, standards are something fixed, right? They are something which need to be followed. You typically don't have a choice when it comes to standards. You cannot pick or choose. You cannot say, I will follow this, I will not follow this. Okay, standards are something which need to be followed, full stop. But guidelines are something which is provide assistance of how to implement the mandatory standards effectively. Okay, I'm sorry about the double typo, but yeah, standards effectively. Key components is covers similar areas as standards, including reporting, engagement planning, and evidence, but focus on practical application and examples. ISACA guidelines basically are around audit charter, planning, reporting, organizational independence, and risk assessment. So these are the areas of where guidelines have been provided by ISACA in how to do the audit. So these are certain audit standards and guidelines, how they flow. So basically standards must be followed. Guidelines, again, it's more of provide assistance on how the auditor should implement. And finally, tools and techniques. So how you will actually carry this out. So provides examples of steps an auditor may follow to implement those particular standards. Step-by-step guide. Right? Okay. Security standards and frameworks. These are the various most common global security standards and frameworks. Right? SOX. We already discussed SOX, right? I said the history behind SOX and how it basically is important even today because all listed companies in the US need to comply. And it's not just about listed companies. It also applies to their subsidiaries, their holding company, whichever is relevant to the financial statement of the company where SOX is required. The next one is HIPAA. I was discussing HIPAA, right? Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's not insurance, but fair enough. I'll modify that. Okay. Health information it is. So ensures the privacy of medical records and patient information. So that's the whole requirement of, basically HIPAA has guideline, in the sense it has standards. It basically requires, organizations to have certain specific controls: security, physical, logical, administrative. So those will basically determine, the organization has to comply with those specific standards. PCI DSS, payment card industry data security standard, is primarily for credit card organizations which process credit card data. So for example, whenever you make a payment, right, it takes you to a MasterCard or a Visa page. So verified by MasterCard, verified by Visa. By Visa in India, typically if you go, it will take you to some Razor Pay or some other page, right? And all of them, if you see below, it will be written PCI DSS compliant. Okay. Notice next time whenever you open a payment site, it will be written at the bottom saying PCI DSS compliant, because the payment card industry, right, including what do you call, Visa, the MasterCard. So all those organizations which basically are processing payments need to comply with PCI DSS standards. So PCI is a payment card industry, right? It's an industry body which is made up of the big credit card players, and they come up with technical standards. So PCI DSS is technical. It defines exactly what type of technical controls the organization should have, right? So PCI has come out with standards, and those standards, the DSS, right, data security standard. So that standard basically is what auditors will actually check whether the organization is compliant or meeting the requirements of those standards, and look at the evidences. Last is GDPR. GDPR again is basically governs privacy of personal data of EU citizens. Okay, that's the primary role. And GDPR applies to any part of the world wherever EU citizen data is stored. Okay, and hence what happens is GDPR has a lot of regulation. Trust me, it's huge amount of regulation. And they even fine organizations which basically don't meet the requirements. We've heard a lot in the news, right? Amazon was fined, Meta was fined. Okay, so that's basically about GDPR. The next one is ISO 27001. This is one of the most, I would say, common and the most popular standards. And most of the organizations that you go today will basically have an ISO certification. The reason for this being that the ISO, International Standards Organization, has come up with ISO 27001, which basically defines, right, information security controls and processes. So provides a code of practice for implementing and maintaining information security controls and processes. And ISO certificate, basically what it means is that if an organization has an ISO certificate, it says that that organization has the requisite policies, the procedures, and the processes in place, right, which are required under ISO 27001. So ISO 27001 has a requirement of ISMS, right? Basically, information security manual. Okay, having information security manual, doing vulnerability assessment, having the requisite policies and procedures. So there are a lot of requirements which are there as part of ISO 27001, and basically a certificate on ISO 27. Let's say if an external auditor comes in, basically that auditor has to be empaneled with the ISO organization, right? They come in, they basically do the review and issue the report on the behalf of ISO. saying that this organization is compliant with ISO 27001 requirements. So focus is primarily adherence to compliance standards, including PCI DSS. Not necessary, but it's its own standard itself. Role in organization: assist organizations establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving their information security management system. Any questions on this? Okay. The US also has one specific certification called NIST. NIST, National Institute of, sorry, I'll just need to look it up. So NIST is a, how do I say, body, right, which comes under, or rather, which comes up with standards. It's a government body basically, and they come up with standards, right? National Institute of Standards, it's basically just get the full name. Yeah, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So basically, NIST is the US body for issuing the the technology standards in the US, and one major one that they have issued, which basically covers IT and processes, right? Cybersecurity, including some mode of cybersecurity, is NIST 800-53. Okay, and basically framework selecting and specific security controls for information systems, right? And basically enhance security posture of organizations for providing a comprehensive set of controls, because NIST is very descriptive. It actually says what all controls an organization should ideally have. If they don't have, then it becomes a non-compliance. Importance in cybersecurity serves as the foundational element for building robust cybersecurity capabilities, because it focuses a lot on cybersecurity. Applicability, okay. NIST is typically applicable in full to federal organizations which basically have federal data, right? US government data. It is not applicable to all organizations. Okay. Applicability, compliance, and best practices, not mandatory except for Department of Defense contractors, yet widely adopted as a best practice in the industry. Typically, if let's say you want to show that your product or your environment is very highly secure, then the gold standard is NIST 53, 800-53. Okay. And similarly, there's another one called High Trust, which are also similar lines. So let's stop here, because conducting an audit will take time in terms of a lot of areas. Let's do some Q&A. Let's take a stab at whatever we have discussed, and then we can go to questions. Right? Okay. Which standard is primarily used by IS auditors for guidance? This is a pretty straightforward one. 3. Yeah, I guess not much of a this thing here, right? So IS auditing standards provide comprehensive guidance tailored to IS auditing profession. Okay, next. What is the key benefit of using computer-assisted audit tools? We have not yet come to this, but can you take a guess? 3, okay. Okay. So we have some unanimity on 3, and yes, they basically increase the audit risk because although they automate, right? They don't automate all. They only automate a few, and hence, and they don't eliminate risk. Nothing will eliminate risk. You can mitigate, but nothing will eliminate your risk. So it's increasing efficiency. Okay. What is the primary characteristic of an effective IS auditor? We have discussed this, right? Technical expertise, strong communication, ability to work independently, extensive programming knowledge. The trick question. 3, okay, ability to work independently, fair enough. Why not strong communication? Yep. Some people are saying strong communication as well. See, the problem with ISACA or CISA questions is they'll always be like this. Two answers will always seem correct. Okay. And the challenge is which of the two is the right one and what is the logic behind it. Okay. So we have two, some say 3. Answer is 2 because strong communication skills enable auditors to clearly present findings and collaborate with stakeholders. So their thought process is, so this question is taken from a question bank only. So ISACA's this one, I think one of this question comes in the exams also. And the logic behind this is, it's not just about working independently, right? You saw if there is a big one, you have to work with teams as well. Okay, so it's not independent working, which is one of the main one. So then what is left? Basically communication skills, because your communication skills will help you to communicate with the respective stakeholders. Why is independence important for an IS auditor? It ensures auditor is knowledgeable, unbiased analysis, guarantees audit quality, simplifies the audit process. Okay, 2. Why not 3? Oh wow, everybody says 2. But why not 3? Anyway, 2 because independence primarily allows for an unbiased analysis, right? It's critical to maintain objectivity and ensure the credibility of the audit findings. This is interesting. Which of the following best defines audit risk? The risk of financial loss due to audit findings, right? The risk that audit procedures might not detect errors, the risk of non-compliance with audit standards, the risk of unauthorized access to audit files. Why? I want someone to explain. I know a lot of you have said 2. Can someone explain why 2? Why not the others? Any one of you? No one? So auditors, the auditors may not detect material misstatements in the financial statements. So primarily the whole objective here is, so of course this is from a financial standpoint, but the same applies for IT also, right? That we may not detect something material in the application per se, let's say some change or some access related area where we have not seen or we are not actually verifying it correctly. What role does professional skepticism play in IS auditing? It ensures auditors are always doubtful. Okay. It allows auditors to challenge assumptions. It reduces the need for documentation. It increases audit cost. So do you know what is professional skepticism? I'm assuming a lot of you know what is professional skepticism, so I'm happy. But primarily it says when I'm skeptical about something, when I'm challenging or when I'm not sure about something, I'm using my professional knowledge and understanding to take a call. So today, if let's say I'm doing an audit for change management, and I say this change management process is not appropriate or is not basically having the right, is basically not meeting all my risks, then how do I come to that conclusion? Is it not my gut feeling, right? It's not my gut feeling saying, oh, I feel it is not right. I'm using some basis. I'm saying, okay, in a change management, of course, for initiating a change, there is an approval. But let's say when a UAT is done, absolutely having a questioning mindset. So when a UAT is done, right, UAT records are not maintained. Okay, it just has a UAT sign off, but the records are actually not maintained. So is that right or wrong? Correct. Is that something which is an acceptable practice or a non-acceptable practice? So basically, I use my professional mind or professional understanding and my professional learning to take a call. Similarly here, basically it allows auditors to challenge assumptions, right? Because skepticism is essential for critically assessing audit evidence and assumptions, including through evaluations. What is the main purpose of audit planning? I wish the last one, I'm sure all clients will wish the last one was true. Okay. So why not first and second? One and three. Okay. Of course, here you can only have one answer. So ISACA, as I said, right, questions may look similar, but you can have only one answer as such. So is it either one or three you have to decide? One. Okay. Interesting. So can anyone explain why one or why three? Whichever they have gone with. Take a shot. Why one or why three?
So option 2 and 4 are directly out of the. There are straightforward incorrect because all possible errors cannot be identified within a single audit, maybe, and to eliminate need of further audit is not means audit should be done on periodic basis. And for first and third, the third is more appropriate because the resources need not be allocated equally. They can be allocated as per the requirement or can be allocated more on the high risk areas. But the main goal should be to define audit scope and objective.
Absolutely. That's actually very well said. So see, one also would make sense, but typically resources don't get allocated equally. Again, in a practical scenario, I'm saying, because sometimes I may have a certain experienced resource doing one specific area, whereas I would have junior resources doing more areas or taking more of the load, right? So in that way, one is not in the one may not be is not the correct answer. Three is the correct answer because at the end of the day, I'm actually planning to establish the scope and objectives, and we looked at that as well, right? We discussed that in detail earlier as well. Establishes the scope, objectives, and procedures, ensuring a systematic and focused audit approach. Here, if they have actually not said equally, right? If they had said adequate resources appropriately, then it would have been actually a tie between 1 and 3. That is the reason the word equally comes here, because you can only have one correct answer. Right? How does an auditor use control objectives? Okay. So how do you use objectives? Eliminate risk, design systems, assess adequacy of controls, manage IT projects. 3. Okay. Everyone going in for 3. Okay. The answer is 3. To assess the adequacy of controls, control objectives serve as the benchmarks for evaluating whether controls are adequate to meet organizational goals. Do you want to do some more questions, or shall we call it a day? I am not getting any response. Okay. Then let's do a couple of questions, and then we'll close. Okay. Which of the following is a limitation of IS auditing? Okay, this is interesting. It guarantees the detection of all frauds which of the following is a limitation? Okay. It guarantees the detection of all frauds. It provides absolute assurance. It identifies all control weaknesses. It ensures compliance with all regulations. Exactly. This is a very tricky one. Think about it. Think about the objectives of an IS audit, right? And then assign it here as to what answer actually suits best. What is the objective? Yep. One very good answer is 2. Okay. Why not 3? Give an answer. Doesn't matter. It can be right, wrong. See, that's the reason we are practicing, right? Two. Okay. What about others? Give an answer. It's okay. It need not be right or wrong. 2 with the crowd. Okay. 1. Fair enough. Yep. All the answers actually seem right. So I agree. Okay. So what's the answer? It provides absolute assurance. See, we spoke, right? Provides reasonable assurance. The whole objective is to give an assurance. In one of the slides also we looked at it, right? Initial slide, that the objective of IS audit is to give an assurance around controls. So here it can never give a complete absolute assurance. And we discussed this in detail as well, right? We said why it is reasonable assurance and why not absolute assurance. So yeah, interesting and very tricky question. Trust me, you will definitely have some questions like this also in the exam. Not many, but some definitely you will have, which has a very tricky answer. What is the primary role of information system auditor during an audit? Okay, this is straightforward. Quickly. Easy one, actually. All of you agree with one? Okay, I also agree with one. Yep. Yes. Assess compliance with internal controls. Primary information system auditor is to assess compliance, establish internal controls and standards. See, all questions should be like this. Okay, last one. Who is considered the auditee in an information system audit? The IT department, the external auditor conducting the review, the organization's customers, or the internal audit committee? This is also a tricky one. But who is considered an auditee in information system audit? Organization's customers or the internal audit committee? There is no internal audit committee, the audit committee of the industry. Okay. Yep, 1. Right. So the auditee is an information system audit is definitely the IT department. Okay. Last, in an audit, what role does the customer play? Yep. This is also a straightforward one. Okay, everybody says 2. Yep, not of course. Yes, they're the recipients of the audit report. Stakeholders of management receive audit reports to understand the state of information systems. See, here the challenge here is when you say customer, right? Again, define the audit criteria is actually defined by the auditor. The audit criteria is defined by the auditor. Scope may be defined, but criteria and all gets defined by the auditor. So that's the reason we are saying recipients, conduct is done by the auditor, and last one is also review internal controls is done by the process owner, or review is done by the auditor also, rather, right? It's a dual thing, 4. So that's the reason 2 is the best answer in this scenario. Okay, we are 6 minutes past. So anything else? Anyone? Any thoughts? Any suggestions?
No suggestion, but one request from my side. The question we are practicing, we can get it so that we can also see the details.
I have to check. I will check and let you know. Give me till tomorrow, I will let you know.
Sure.
Thank you. In fact, this is even whatever you are seeing, right, will be there in the recording. So even if it doesn't come, we are anyway going through the questions, right? So this will be in the recording anyways.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything to add or anything for me to take care from session tomorrow?
Can I make a request?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I know that you've been an auditor for so long. Can you make it more from your experience point of view, that what were your pain points and how you have, um, planned the audit, or how you have made the reports or whatever. Like that way, I think it could be more interactive and we would be able to connect more and know what real case scenarios are.
Okay.
If that can happen, it would be really great.
Sure, absolutely. So one example I tried to give was for sales. So something like that is fine, or something more detailed?
Yes. Yeah, in detail is also fine, but that example was great. So it would be great if we can make it that way.
Sure, absolutely. You just have to ask, guys. It brings back a lot of memories, in terms of because I did audits right from 2000. I have been doing IT audits from 2007. So trust me, at that time, people, the concept of having a 6-character password also was like, why do we need such a long password? Who's going to remember? And you see in the movies, right? They put it on post-its and stick it on the monitors. So trust me, I have
Yep.
seen that as the reality. People actually doing it. So password expiry, people were never not ready to even say that we will not do. How can you even keep it at 6 months? They should not be expiry. We will use the password we want. How can you have a password history? I want to use the same password. Okay, trust me. Okay, I will take those. We'll discuss that as well. Thank you for pointing that
Yes. Yeah. Also, I also wanted to ask if, let's say, if there is if we are planning the entire audit, there
out.
must be some templates that everything is put in, like the name, the scope, all of that. Can we also get examples of how it looks like? Because I don't have audit background and I want to get into audit, so it would be a really good start for me to see how it actually works in real life.
So I think when we are basically looking at how do I say, the topic when we come across, right? Because right now we just started with planning, right? Now we'll go to execution, then we'll go to field work, then we'll go to reporting. So at that time, I think those aspects are coming in the deck. I will see
Okay.
if I can get hold of some work paper which I can show you, because most
Mhm.
of the challenges, like uh, work papers are proprietary, right? In terms of each different firm or each different organization has their own templates, and hence, they are more or less proprietary in terms of what it has. If I'm having something generic, I will definitely try and show it to you. But mostly, since it's proprietary, it's difficult to even redact and show, because the template itself is proprietary, right? If you look at even for Big Fours, all Big Fours have different templates in terms of their own, how the documentation is done. Similarly, when you come down to the other firms as well, right? The even BDO, RSM, uh, GT, they also have their own templates which they use. Trust me, I have worked for one of the largest pharma companies in the world. They had their own templates which they were using. So I'm just saying, like, all this, considering, it's difficult to do, but I will try my best to see if I can, definitely showcase.
Okay, sounds good. Also, one last thing. We have also received Udemy links for the course.
Yes.
Is there a recommendation that before the next class or after some lectures, how do we, go through the videos and give the practice the questions? I believe they have it in the course, which is provided to us, the Udemy one. So would you recommend if we go through them before the class or after the class, and how would it help us to, get better, and how can we give the exams
So, okay,
faster?
okay, faster. I will come to that, right? But coming to the course, see, there are two aspects. This is again in person, more interactive, right? You're able to ask. So, if you are able to, look at this, ask your, look at this, ask your queries and all, you can then see the course subsequently and more as a refresher, because you'll have this recording and you'll have a different perspective there as well. If you want to see the course first, then maybe come here, understand what I'm saying, and then ask questions wherever you have a doubt. That also works. So both the options are there. Typically, the Udemy course, because it's directly from Hemang, it's more, he is the authority on in terms of the book on information systems auditing, and in terms of the concept around IT audits. So from that standpoint, if you can maybe have a look at one video, because those are also, it's not one, right? It's multiple videos across domains.
Right.
So, yeah, you can have a look at one video, and if you feel that next day you want to come and ask some questions, because of course we'll have one session tomorrow, then we have a whole week, 5 days, right? And then we have again the next session. So if in between you get some time, you want to have a look at the video, make some notes, then come here, see the topics which is explained, and then basis both, you have some queries and you want to ask, saying, okay, this is how it is, this is my understanding, can you explain this further or something like that? That also that is also fine. Or once this course is over, you can look at the Udemy part to basically enhance whatever you've learned here. So again, it's on you in terms of, some people are comfortable this way, some people are comfortable this way. So I would recommend, depending on what you are more comfortable with or what you feel would be more relevant for you.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, then I guess we can wrap up for today. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And
Thank you
see
so
you tomorrow.
much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.